Have you ever picked up a super popular book, really excited to love it as much as everyone else seems to, just soaking up the hype until there's literally nothing else you can do except drop everything and read it right away, starting the first chapter with so much anticipation you can literally taste it, only to start and have that sinking feeling, a dawning horror that you're about to have a very unpopular opinion about the book community's newest darling? Because if so, I feel your pain. This has happened to me so many times. I get excited about a popular book that everyone is saying is the best book ever, and then I start to read it and I just get that feeling in my gut, that slight roiling, the realization that I'm about to be the center of my own tiny little controversy when I admit to the world that I don't see the genius in said popular book. And I always die a little bit inside when this happens because I'm naturally a pretty positive person. I like to like things, preferably to love things. I love to be able to rave about something, talk about how much I adored it, how brilliant and wonderful it was, and yet I will still give negative reviews on books that are wildly popular because honesty is important to me, and because I know what it's like to read a book that seems to be universally loved and feel like the only person on the planet who didn't have a good time. And if I can make even one person out there feel seen and heard and understood, I'm glad to do it. And because I prefer to read books that I love, I mean, who doesn't? I'll usually relegate the authors of these books to my probably never going to read again pile. Sometimes though, I decide to give the author another chance. For example, Emily Henry, very popular author. I read People We Meet on Vacation, and I hated it. Here's my review. Basically, it did less than nothing for me. But I kept hearing more and more about Emily Henry, specifically book lovers. And I, as a book lover myself, became intrigued because I love books about books. Because I'm a cliche. So I eventually gave in. I read Book Lovers, and I really liked it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I had a great time, and it really turned around my impression of Emily Henry as an author. And that made me wonder, are there other authors that I've relegated into the do not touch ever again pile that actually deserve a second chance? So that's the question I'm trying to answer in this video. I've picked 4 ridiculously popular authors from which I've read 1 book each, and I'm going to give each of them 1 more chance. And we'll all see together at the end of this video if I change my mind about any of these 4 authors. Maybe I'll find a new favorite book in this video. Maybe I'll hate all of them. Isn't the unknown fun? Now, I want to get into this video because I've been planning it for a long time and I am ridiculously excited for it. But before I introduce you to the 4 authors I'll be reading from in this video, I want to address the elephant in the room because I know we're all thinking it. Yes, I got new glasses. And yes, they do make me look like a super cool and hip young librarian in the 1950s. It's the look I was going for. And in case you are also ocularly deficient and looking for a place to get affordable yet attractive glasses, I want to talk to you about today's video sponsor, GlassesUSA.com. In case you weren't aware, GlassesUSA.com is one of the biggest eyewear retailers in the US, offering glasses from brands you know and love like Gucci, Ray-Ban, Oakley, and so many more. The best thing about GlassesUSA.com is that they sell glasses for up to 70% off retail prices, starting at just $39. And if you're like me and you like to have a couple different pairs to rotate depending on your mood, your outfit, getting glasses at an affordable price is so important. If you love any of the frames I'm going to show off in this video, you're going to adore the exclusive offer just for you that you can find in the description box. Shopping online is fun, but it can also be super overwhelming, not only with all the options, but also because it's hard to know what something's going to look like on you if you can't try it on. And GlassesUSA.com is here to save the day with their amazing tools to help you find the perfect pair, like their super quick quiz that only takes about a minute and will suggest the right pair of glasses for you based on your face shape and needs. The quiz helped me so much in picking out my new glasses, and I know it'll help you too. I also loved using their AR live try-on. I used it to narrow down my top 10 frames to the 3 I ended up picking, and it was so ridiculously helpful. I even had my husband come down and look at it with me so he could give his input too. Also, shopping online at GlassesUSA.com is a risk-free experience. There's free shipping, free returns, and a 100% money-back guarantee within 14 days. GlassesUSA.com is offering a crazy exclusive discount on top of any coupons they might have on their website just for my followers. It's only available for 24 hours, so click the link at the top of the description box to get all of the details. Thank you again to GlassesUSA.com for sponsoring this video and sending me these 3 pairs of glasses. I'm actually obsessed with them. And without further ado, let me introduce you to the 4 authors I'll be reading from in this video. Let's start with author number 1. Colleen Hoover. Oh, Coho, the queen of book talk tables around the world. Known primarily for her work in the romance genre, the only book I've ever read by Colleen Hoover is her one non-romance book, Verity. And I despised it. To quote the opening line of my Goodreads review, I wish I could go back and unread this book. I still feel that way. After that experience, I had decided never to read from Colleen Hoover again, and yet, the contrarian part of my brain, the part that always has to play devil's advocate with myself, it's very irritating, kept bringing up the fact that it wasn't really fair for me to completely dismiss an author after reading the only book they've ever written in a different genre. How can I judge a romance author for their ability to write a thriller? It feels a little unfair. So here I am, ready to give Colleen Hoover a real college try and see what her romance is all about. And if I'm going to judge Colleen Hoover on only one of her romance works, it felt only fitting to pick her most popular. So I will be reading It Ends With Us. I know literally nothing about this book. I have no idea what it's about. I don't know what the characters' names are. I didn't even read the back. Not even once. I've heard a lot of people talk about it, but I usually zoned out once they did or scroll to a new video. So I literally have no idea what this book is about. I know that some people adore it and it's their favorite book ever. I know some people really dislike it. I know some people think that there are problematic aspects to it. We shall see. Am I gonna like this book? I have no idea. I have an inkling that I won't. I think out of the 4 books I'm reading for this video, this is the one that I'm most sure I'm not going to enjoy. But, I can always be surprised. If I've learned anything in my 3 decades on Earth, it's that you can always be surprised. There are always things that you didn't know about yourself or things you thought you'd hate that you end up loving and vice versa. So who am I to say? Maybe this will become a new favorite. I'm going to try to go into it with an open mind. It's difficult, but I'm trying. Moving on to author number 2 for this video, Sally Rooney. Sally Rooney, the Irish queen of millennial sad girls. Also, the voice of a generation, according to the author of an article I read once with my jaw hanging open because I just finished Beautiful World, Where Are You? And I was completely baffled that the author this article was extolling was the same author that wrote the book that I had just read. Kind of feeling like I'd entered an alternate reality where plotless stories about flat and unlikable characters randomly spewing opinions on every topic under the sun, written in the style of Siri describing my daily to-do list to me in the morning, receives critical acclaim. And the thing is, I know that Sally Rooney is a really popular author for a reason. A lot of people really relate to her work. She's clearly speaking to people, and it kind of makes me feel like an alien because I don't get it. So in one final fruitless attempt to fit in as a regular human being, I'm giving Sally Rooney one more chance with normal people. Once again, I know little to nothing about this book. I know slightly more in that I'm pretty sure that this focuses on 2 young adults who are in college, and I assume that they are relatively normal people. But that is all I know. I'm going to read it, and I'm going to know, once and for all, if Sally Rooney is the voice of a generation or just the voice of a very particular subset of a generation, and whether or not I fit into that very particular subset. On to author number 3, Andy Weir. As the only man on this list, Andy Weir stands out in the way that mediocre white men always seem to, even without trying. You may know Andy Weir from his very famous book turned film starring Matt Damon, The Martian. I don't though, because I've never read it. I read Project Hail Mary, and I wish I could take it back. Project Hail Mary is probably the most irritating of the books on this list, if only because it's overhyped to a level so extreme that I'm never allowed to forget its existence. I shit you not, at least once a week, I see someone posting a very long raving review about how Project Hail Mary is the best book they've ever read in their life, claiming to high heaven that Andy Weir is a genius and no other sci-fi novel has ever, nor will ever, live up to the glory that is Project Hail Mary. And as a longtime lover of sci-fi, I beg to differ. Not only is Project Hail Mary written like an episode of The Magic School Bus for teenagers, but instead of the most epic teacher of all time, Miss Frizzle, who I want to be when I grow up, we get the Gary Sue-iest Gary Sue to have ever existed, who also happens to be a teacher that has none of Miss Frizzle's charm. It's repetitive, the prose is very lackluster, the plot makes very little sense, and everyone's favorite alien, well, he could have only saved it if he murdered the protagonist and took over, which unfortunately, spoiler, he did not. Even more irritating than the book itself is the way that its fans talk about it online. I swear to God, if I have to see one more never-ending thread of fully grown adult humans commenting back and forth things like fist my bump and amaze and you watch I sleep, I will gouge my eyes out. And yet, despite all of this, more than one of the very smart, funny, great people whose bookish opinions I respect has validated my bone-deep hatred of Project Hail Mary, while also commenting that they actually enjoyed The Martian. So here I am, ready to give The Martian a go. And honestly, despite how it might seem from the last couple minutes there, I'm actually feeling pretty optimistic about this one, because there definitely was some potential in Project Hail Mary, even if it was buried under a lot of crap. So, book number 3, The Martian by Andy Weir. And that brings us to the fourth and final author for this video, Ottessa Moshfegh. I feel like Ottessa Moshfegh's entire vibe is that really cool, mysterious, alternative girl in high school who you were too intimidated to befriend, but then at your 10-year reunion, you discover that she was actually just kind of a mean person all along, and you realize you were better off without her. The MC of my year of rest and relaxation is the epitome of that trope. I don't mind an unlikable protagonist. I can quite enjoy the process of inhabiting an unlikable protagonist's experience, perspective. But if it's possible to take an unlikable character too far, Ottessa Moshfegh took it too far with this protagonist. She is irredeemable, privileged to the point of absurdity, mean, petty, and fatphobic. The whole book felt like a fever dream in the worst possible way, and then the ending was so out of left field. It was so absurd. But once again, I just keep hearing from all over the place how incredible Ottessa Moshfegh is, that she's a genius, that her books are unlike any other. And I keep thinking, maybe I just got a lemon. Maybe my year of rest and relaxation is the literary lemon of Ottessa Moshfegh's body of work. And so, I'm going to be reading Death in Her Hands for the 4th time. It's a bit of a theme at this point. I have no idea what this book is about. I have not read the blurb on the back. I haven't watched any reviews on it. And that's how I like it. So, those are the 4 authors. These are the 4 books I'm going to be reading in this video, and we'll see if they change my mind. Before I jump into reading the first book, I thought it might be fun to rank these in the order I think I'm going to like them. So if you want to participate, feel free to let me know in the comments down below what order you think I'm going to rank these from favorite to least favorite. So my ranking, I think, honestly, I actually think they're already in the order. I think they might already be in the order. Well, no, actually, hang on. This might be, I don't know. This is what I think. Do I? Yeah, no, this is what I think. Okay. Why is The Martian so much smaller and chunkier than all the other books? I hate that so much. All books should have exactly the same dimensions. This is my prediction. Favorite to least favorite. Once again, I know little to nothing about any of these, so this is just going off covers, previous experience with the authors, vibes, but this is my prediction. And at the end of this video, we shall discover not only how I feel about these books and whether I am writing off these authors for the rest of time, but also if I know myself well and predicted my order, or if I got it completely wrong. Now, I can't procrastinate any longer, and I think I'm gonna rip off the band-aid by starting with the one that I predict will be my least favorite to get it out of the way. It ends with us, Colleen Hoover. I am mildly terrified. So I'm gonna get started on this. I will come back when I have an update. I have an inkling I'm going to not enjoy the process of reading it, but it's for scientific purposes and for entertainment value, so it's fine. Let's do it. I just finished the first chapter of It Ends With Us, and I wanted to just do a super quick update with my first impression of this book, because wow. As you'll know, I like to annotate while I read, and typically, the different colors of tabs are things like quotes, themes that I'm trying to keep on top of, world building, character development, things of that nature. And coming up with those things is something I do as I read, as I figure out, what kind of book it is and what sort of things I might want to keep track of. So as I read the first chapter, I started creating my little key for my tabs, and this is what I have so far. So that might give you a bit of an idea. I also usually highlight and write in books as I read, but especially for this one, because I'm really not sure if it's going to be one that I'm going to want to keep on my shelves, I kind of wanted to avoid permanently writing in it. So instead of doing my regular just highlighting and writing in the book itself, I have clear Post-its, and then I have a fine-tipped black Sharpie and like a beige brown regular Sharpie that I'm using as my pen and highlighter so that it doesn't smudge. So thoughts on the first chapter. So our protagonist is Lily Bloom. The way the chapter starts is off-putting to me, just not a great first impression, to be honest. And then the introduction to the character comes across like the pilot episode of a Nickelodeon show where you hear the voice of the protagonist walking you through their life or introducing you to random people on the street until they sort of pan over to one particularly quirky looking girl. And as you get closer, they say, "Hey, that's me. I'm Lily Bloom." That's basically exactly how this character introduces herself. Very strange in an adult book. It feels like something that fits in middle grade. Then there's some fun referring to women as females and men as males on page 5, so that always bodes well. We have a very hello fellow kids moment where Lily assures all of us that she has in fact partied and been cool when she says, "I'm 23, I've been through college and have done this very same recreational drug a time or two. I'm not going to judge this guy for feeling the need to toke up in private." It's like, sure, Jan. We've got a beautiful man who smells like money, because of course we do, who says things like, "If only my issues were as trivial as matters of the heart," to a random woman he just met on a rooftop. Lily is definitely one of the fellow youths who has done the recreational drugs, but she's also super judgmental about people who smoke weed for some reason. So she's thinking about Ryle, and she says, "Stylish, well-spoken, and smart, and smokes pot. If this were an SAT question, I would ask which one didn't belong." Oh yeah, she's also judgmental about people who swear, which is fun. I tried to think of something with a little shock value, but I can't get over the fact that he just said that out loud. Maybe because he's a neurosurgeon, and I never pictured someone so educated throwing around the word so casually. Oh yeah, also, it's selfish not to want children, according to Lily. So that's nice. Oh yeah, and Ryle is very charming, so he says things like, "When I have time, there are girls who satisfy those needs. I don't lack for anything in that department if that's what you're asking, but love has never appealed to me. It's always been more of a burden than anything." Ryle also tells Lily that there are no such thing as bad people. We're all just people who sometimes do bad things, and that's like a huge revelation for Lily for some reason, because at 23 she's never considered that people are complex. I'm glad Lily is becoming aware of this fact, as someone with a master's degree apparently. Which also, I just remembered, she said she has a master's degree, so she's been around other people who have post-secondary education and she's never heard any of them use the F word. I find that very hard to believe for some reason. So anyways, that's chapter 1. I'm having a great time so far. I'm really hoping that this gets better, although I'm not sure how much hope I have. We shall see. It is getting late. I'm hungry. I'm tired. I want to hang out with my husband and go to sleep. So, see you later. Hey, so I'm back. It's actually been a lot longer than I expected it to be before I came back. I honestly had to take an extended break from reading It Ends With Us. It was getting to me, okay? I was getting very annoyed. So I took about a week to read other things, which was very rejuvenating for my mind and soul. But anyway, I got back to it in the last couple days, and I'm now, as of a couple minutes ago, a little bit past halfway through, and I thought I would stop and give an update. I'm now just at the end of chapter 15, and I have so many thoughts. Some of those really egregious, quirky TM, Manic Pixie Dream Girl sections for both Lily and Ryle, those have kind of tapered off a little bit because we've gotten into a bit more of the plot-heavy central section of the book, and we've also had the first real conflict in the present timeline, and so things are a lot more serious. So I just feel like there's less space for some of the irritating, gimmicky things that were happening earlier on, which I'm happy about, but I'm not sure that what's replacing it is really all that much better. Without giving spoilers, this book talks a lot about domestic violence, and I don't have anything wrong with books addressing domestic violence. I do find it weird that my impression of this book from the cultural zeitgeist was that it was a romance, and so far I don't find it romantic in the least. And I'm finding that kind of strange so far, and I'm a little bit worried that this is going to be one of those books that glorifies unhealthy behavior, and that some of the people who are reading this and seeing it as a romance are younger people who are not necessarily picking up on all the red flags. I don't know. I'm only halfway through. Things could change drastically in the second half, so I'm trying not to pass too much judgment, but I'm definitely feeling concerned about the direction it's going in so far. I do definitely find the flashbacks more interesting in general than the present day. I find Atlas as a character more interesting. I think Lily is more interesting as a teenager, and in the context of her trying to figure out what's going on with Atlas and figure out her feelings about him, as well as dealing with her complicated feelings about her parents and the domestic abuse situation. The past feels a little bit more real to me. It feels more grounded. I really hate the gimmick of writing to Ellen. My God, is it irritating. Maybe what I'll do is give a little bit of a spoiler moment for anyone who's read this book. So I'll put timestamps in the chapters in the description box, which you can use to navigate around this video, but I'll also have a spoiler indicator on the screen in case you just want to turn the volume down and sort of drag through to when the spoiler symbol disappears. So I can give a bit of a spoilery review of the first half. So spoilers starting now. Skip this part if you don't want spoilers. Okay. Ryle, like I already said, is insufferable. He was already giving off a lot of red flags before the incident, but basically she's cooking dinner and he comes over, and then she realizes that she didn't take it out of the oven in time and it's going to be burnt, so Ryle goes to pull it out of the oven and he doesn't grab an oven mitt for some reason, and he's a surgeon and he grabs it with his bare hand and burns himself, and then drops the casserole or whatever it was on the ground, and the glass dish it was in smashes all over the floor, and he's rinsing his hand underwater, and he's really upset because it's his right hand that he does surgery with, and he has a big surgery coming up. And even just that setup was a little odd to me, because if you're someone who relies so much on your hands for a living, you would be more cautious. Like, I just find it really unlikely that someone would reach in and grab a hot pan with their bare hand in that situation. I mean, even just doing that in general, even if your hands aren't, the most important thing to your entire career, is a bit odd for an adult to do, because most of us are pretty trained by the time you reach adulthood that you always grab some sort of heating pad or put your hand in an oven mitt before you get something out of the oven. So I found the setup a little odd. And then the next part of it, which is that Lily starts laughing, which is a really weird reaction. And I mean, I guess, people react to intense situations in different ways. So maybe her first reaction was laughter, but then she didn't immediately stop herself and make sure he was fine. She just tried to get closer to him and kept laughing, which is weird. And then his reaction was sort of like pushing her, I guess. It's not super clear. At first, when I was reading it, I thought he just sort of was leaning over the sink and then stood up and kind of turned and like hit her by accident. And then she fell because she didn't expect him to turn around. But then later on, it seems like he intentionally pushed her. And I honestly still don't know at this point which one it is. Maybe we'll get more clarity later on. Maybe I wasn't reading closely enough, but I just feel like it wasn't super clear. And then he ended up cutting his hand as well, like pretty deeply. I found the whole thing kind of weird, and I can understand, I guess, her thinking that she wants to give him a second chance, and then also setting that boundary of, if anything like that ever happens again, it's done. And I mean, I don't know yet. I'm halfway through. I don't know what's going to happen. I am worried that that boundary is not as set in stone as she's making it seem. I'm worried that something else is going to happen and she's going to make excuses for him again, which I'm not excited to read about. I don't know. I just have a pit at the bottom of my stomach. I'm really worried that teenagers are going to be reading this and romanticizing Ryle and, you know, seeing Lily make excuses for him and take him back after that first situation and be like, oh yeah, see, it's totally fine. And, you know, even if she doesn't end up with him in the end, I'm a little bit worried about the way the book is handling it. I don't know. I've just seen so many teenagers who sort of idolize and pine after characters that are really problematic, have a lot of red flags, are just really shitty partners, and mostly stayed away from conversations about this book. But I am aware from the little bit that I've seen that there are people who are Team Ryle. Yeah, it's just really not working for me so far. I also didn't love the way that Atlas reacted to the situation. I think it makes sense for their characters for him to try to reach out to her and make sure she's okay. But the cornering her in the bathroom and then immediately attacking Ryle and saying really aggressive, intense things to him just felt like a lot. I've liked Atlas pretty well so far, although I will say that him sort of harping on when she's going to turn 16 made it feel like he was creepily waiting for her to hit the age of consent so that they could sleep together, which was weird and creepy. It was a little bit of a weird choice when she easily could have been 17, and then that could have just not been a plot point at all. And I'm again worried that people are going to romanticize that, like, ooh, manly, two men are fighting over me, they're getting super aggressive and mad at each other, and isn't this so hot thing, which I just find so toxic and unappealing in every possible way. So those are my spoiler thoughts of the first half. Spoiler finished, back to unspoileriness. I'm just concerned about how this book is going to continue to address the subject matter. I also think it's really weird that this book seems to be framed as a romance when so much of it is very not romantic. When I say so much, I mean literally all of it is not romantic. So I'm going to do my best to push through and just finish this today, and then I can come back and give you my final thoughts on this book and my rating, and whether or not I will ever give Colleen Hoover another chance after this, or if this is the second and final time that I'll be reading any of Hoover's work. Finished It Ends With Us, and unsurprisingly, I have thoughts. I want to say from the very beginning of this that I do not have personal experience with domestic violence. I am aware that there are people who feel that this was an accurate representation of things that they've been through. This is a book that was written based on Colleen Hoover's mother's experience. Lily is based on her mother, which she talks about in the author's note at the end. I don't have the expertise or the personal experience to critique the way that the domestic violence was represented, and I will say that of anything in the book, the only thing that made me feel anything, the only thing that I felt touched on something real and true was the exploration of all of the complicated feelings and thoughts that push and pull, the conflict, trying to accept that someone who you love is also an abuser. And I think that's what this book does the best, but I don't think it did anything else very well. So I've already mentioned a lot of these things in the earlier updates, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but basically I really disliked the writing. I found it very juvenile. The characters felt very two-dimensional and very young. I don't know why this book is classified as a romance. It isn't a romance. There's nothing about it that is a romance, and I think that framing is really irresponsible to be honest. I truly wonder how many people go into reading this assuming it is a romance, like I did, and have the rug pulled out from them when they realize that it isn't a romance. Nothing of the sort. Obviously, if y'all watch my videos about books, you already know that I am a supporter of trigger warnings, sharing trigger and content warnings. I think they're important. I think readers deserve to be given the chance to choose what content they are willing to read about. The fact that this book does not give any warning as to the content that is coming, I just feel like that is really not okay. I can imagine how triggering this could be to read for someone who has had personal experience with this. You know, the way that Colleen Hoover talks about the reason why she wrote the book and how she feels about it in the author's note makes me think that she does care about victims of domestic abuse and wrote this, you know, with good intentions. And that should translate to protecting and supporting the mental health of her readers by giving them the chance to make a choice about whether or not they can read the content by having trigger content warnings at the beginning of the book and also marketing the book as what it is. I'm just going to quickly give you my rating for this book and whether I'll be giving Colleen Hoover another shot before I get into the little spoiler bit. Again, I will put some sort of symbol on the screen to let you know it's spoiler territory, and it will also be added to the chapters down below so you can skip it. But before I do that spoiler bit, I will just say my rating for It Ends With Us is 1 star, and I am feeling pretty certain that I'm done for good with Colleen Hoover. I don't have any interest in reading any of her books ever again. Her books are not for me. I have determined that at this point, so that's where I'm at. If you're gonna skip the spoiler section, do that now, and I will get into talking about the next book I'm gonna be reading. For those of you who want the spoiler chat, I'm going to do that now. It feels almost like Colleen Hoover wrote the book the way she did because she wanted the reader to kind of get into the head of Lily, to read it as if it's a romance, to start to fall in love with Ryle and Lily together, so that as things start to go sour, you feel a lot of the feelings that Lily's feeling, the confusion, the surprise, you know, making excuses and trying to rationalize it and all of those things. And I think, you know, that could be an effective technique to get people to empathize with the experience of being a victim of domestic abuse, but she didn't do it effectively because she wrote a character that had 5 billion red flags from the very beginning. Ryle is not a good partner from the very beginning. There are so many red flags, so many hints at obsessive behavior, controlling behavior, anger issues, jealousy issues, just a huge amount of narcissism and arrogance and objectification and over-sexualization of a whole human that he doesn't seem to see as a whole human being. There's just a lot going on with Ryle from the very beginning that led me to immediately not like him. I haven't read any of Colleen Hoover's other books, so I don't know if that is the type of character she usually writes as a love interest, but I have read other romance novels and books with romance in them who have a male love interest who is just like Ryle before the first incident, and to me that is not something to aspire to. It's not something to dream about, and I will never stop talking about how harmful I think it is to constantly drive home to young women, whether they are literally girls, teenagers reading books like this, or adults who still don't have a huge amount of lived experience in their lives, that this kind of man, Ryle at the beginning of this book, is the kind of person that people should be attracted to or seeking in a partner, because all the things that he does that are framed as romantic and passionate and fighting for his love and, you know, showing Lily how much he cares about her and how much he wants her and all that stuff, it's all not okay, and it's all signs of the kind of person he is and what he's capable of. It's all red flags, it's all toxicity. So the ending. I have a big problem with this book being about Lily being based on Colleen Hoover's mother, who was abused by Colleen Hoover's father and chose to leave him when Colleen was 3, and Colleen talks about the fact that she loved her father and they had a great relationship, and that she felt like her mother allowed her to have a positive relationship with her father because she separated them and didn't allow her kids to see her be the victim of his domestic violence. And that's basically what's going on with Lily in the book. In the end, she has Ryle's baby. They are separated at the time, and shortly after she gives birth, I think it's 15 minutes after, she has this realization that she has to divorce him because she can't allow him to have the same effect on their daughter that her mother and father's relationship dynamic had on her growing up, having to watch her mother be abused by her father. So she divorces him, but chooses to keep him in their life so that he can be an active father and have custody however many times a week of their daughter. On the one hand, yes, that was the correct decision. She should leave him. Yes, the divorce, great choice. I am not sure how I feel about continuing to allow him to have custody alone of their child, because the way that they frame his violence, which is another thing that I'm not super on board with, is that he basically blacks out and goes into this extreme rage where he doesn't even know what he's doing, which I don't love that framing, because unless he literally is in some sort of a fugue state where he is not conscious of his actions, being very angry and doing things you wouldn't do when you're not very angry is not the same thing as being blacked out and incapable of knowing what you're doing and doing things like someone else is in control of your body. If that was actually the case, he is dealing with a severe mental illness, and that's something that should be treated by a professional, because that's not safe for anyone he's around, including an infant. The fact that we finished the book with this romantic reconciliation where she runs after Atlas to be with him, leaving her infant daughter with Ryle alone, it did not have the impact I think it was supposed to have. It left me with a pit in my stomach, because she even says at one point, like, I know you didn't mean it, which is a whole other thing. Like, she never seems to acknowledge that he had agency in his choices, but she says as she's breaking up with him, you know, I know that you didn't intend to hurt me, but you still did, and, you know, I can't let our daughter be around that, basically. She's acknowledging that he didn't intend to hurt her. He never would have intentionally hurt her, according to her, but he still did, because he got angry and he couldn't control his rage. What do you think children do? Children do all kinds of stuff that piss off their parents. Children can break random things. They will certainly laugh at you when you hurt yourself or throw tantrums. Like, kids are a lot. And if someone has anger issues already, being around kids is not going to make that go away. It's only going to amplify that. And I have a lot of trouble believing that this kind of uncontrollable violent rage that he has is something that could only ever be directed toward a significant other and couldn't be something directed toward their child. And I feel very uncomfortable with the idea of their child being left alone with him. There's no mention of him getting any kind of more intensive therapy. They mention he's been getting therapy earlier in the book, but nothing about how that is helping to do with trauma from his childhood when he accidentally murdered his brother, which we get no information about, and how that could be tied with his anger issues. But there's never any acknowledgement of specific treatment for this incredibly violent rage. I don't know how this is a happy ending. I don't know how this is an ending that we should feel comfortable about. The infant in this book is not a real person, and I feel intense anxiety about this fictional baby being left with this fictional man, because that's not a safe situation to be in. And I feel like it's really irresponsible to frame the ending as this perfect solution where they can be really amicable, they can be friends, they can co-parent. He can take their infant on his own and everything's great, because all he needed was to no longer be in a romantic relationship, and now it's fine. It doesn't work like that. I also am concerned about someone being a medical professional, someone doing complicated surgery who has this kind of an anger issue, and when that could be triggered and whether patients might be at risk. That's a whole other layer that the book doesn't even attempt to get into. I was very unhappy with the ending. I don't mind that Lily ends up with Atlas. As much as he is a two-dimensional character, he seems generally more like a calm, caring, supportive partner as much as we saw of him. I'm still side-eyeing Colleen's choice to make him 18 and her 15 at the start, and him waiting for her 16th birthday for them to have sex. Why? It had nothing to do with the plot. It was literally just put in there because she decided to put it in there. And that is weird. And why? Those are my more spoilery thoughts. Why can't I? That's definitely not a word. Spoilery? Is it a word? Let me know in the comments. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this at any point, and this has nothing to do with what I was just talking about, but I just want to add that I really hate the concept of Lily's flower shop, that it's like black flowers with silver studded chains wrapped around them and stuff. Why? It really feels like if a scene kid opened a flower shop in 2005. Very strange to me. Anyway, so that's It Ends With Us. 1 star from me. I will put up the book card on the screen with the trigger/content warnings, things that I noticed while I was reading. It might not be a completely comprehensive list. Please keep these in mind if you are considering reading this book, because it has a lot of very heavy, very intense, very upsetting subject matter. It should be marketed that way, and it should be something that readers are informed about, and I will die on this hill. So Colleen Hoover, first author in this video that I picked up out of the I've read you once and I'm not really sure if I'm ever going to read from you again pile, and I'm putting her permanently into the pile that I've labeled, okay, I gave you a second shot, and it's still a no. Book 1. So now that I've finally finished It Ends With Us, I'm ready to move on to the second book for this video, which is going to be Normal People by Sally Rooney. And we'll see if I feel the same way as I did about Beautiful World, Where Are You? Or maybe I'll love it. We shall see. There's something really satisfying about a really floppy paperback. Anyway. So I am halfway through Normal People, and I feel like I don't have that many thoughts, to be honest. At this point, I don't know that this is making me feel anything. I was gonna continue that sentence, but I feel like that was enough. That kind of got the idea across. I just don't feel anything about this book right now, other than, I guess, mild annoyance at most of the characters who kind of suck. Yeah, I feel a little bit hoodwinked. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I didn't do any extra research into what the books are actually about, and I definitely was under the impression that this was a book about two college students having a complicated relationship, which is true, except that the first several chapters, maybe even the first quarter of the book, is them in high school. A pet peeve for me personally is reading about teenage characters having explicit sex. That makes me real uncomfy, and I don't think there's anything wrong with writing explicit sex with teenage characters, especially if it's showing healthy sexual relationships. The sex we see in this book between these teenagers is not great in terms of representing a healthy sexual relationship between teens, not to mention the entire relationship dynamic, which added to this whole feeling that their sexual relationship was not particularly healthy or beneficial to both of them. That started me off on a not so great foot with this book, and it just kind of flatlined from there. There is very little plot. Then I look at the characters and I just don't care about them. That sounds really harsh, but I don't. Connell and Marianne are the main characters, and Connell is a dick. He just is. Marianne is less of a dick. I'd say she possibly isn't a dick at all. I had inklings early on when they were still in high school. There were a couple moments that I thought, oh, I can see some of those internal patterns for her that are causing her issues, that are causing her to have lower self-esteem or to withdraw from other people. But it just started to fall apart, I felt like, once she left high school. It's like the door that we had cracked open into her internal experiences was just slammed closed. And I feel like I don't know anything about who Marianne is as a young adult. So I'm finding her less and less interesting because we're not getting a lot of info about her. The only character I would say I like so far is Lorraine, who is Connell's mom. She's cool. I like her. What else? Oh, how could I possibly forget? I wasn't faced with this when I read Beautiful World, Where Are You? Because I listened to the audiobook, so I did not know this was a thing. Sally Rooney doesn't use quotation marks, and it's awful. It's the worst. It's so confusing for no reason. And not only does she not use quotation marks, but she doesn't always separate dialogue into its own paragraph so that at least it stands separate and you can start to pick up on the fact that it's dialogue. Sometimes it's just inserted into a paragraph that people are saying things and you don't know someone is talking until you get to the end of a portion of them talking and it says Marianne or Peggy says or whatever. And then you have to go back and figure out when they actually started talking. Why make it so confusing for no reason? This is the worst. I don't think I've ever read a book that doesn't include quotation marks when people are talking, and I would like to never again. What else? Oh yeah, and there's also just some weird, questionable content. The whole little side story about one of their high school teachers being interested in Connell romantically when they're in high school, it being basically just a rumor around school, and then once they're in college, there's another event that makes it explicitly clear that she is interested in him sexually, and it's icky. It's not like the book frames it as not icky. It does frame it as icky, but like, why? Is there a reason why it's there? Does that need to be included? It makes me think of It Ends With Us and the fact that for no reason, Colleen Hoover wrote an age gap between Lily and what's his name? I already forgot his name. I finished this like a day ago. What's his name? Oh God. Astral? That's not his name. Atlas. Atlas. Wow. Anyway, Lily and Atlas, them having an age gap so that he is 18 and she's only 15 when they start falling in love. But like, it didn't have to be there, and the fact that it was there and it came up over and over again, it was unnecessary. It was weird. It didn't need to happen. So that's kind of how I'm feeling about that dynamic here as well, unless there's going to be some sort of thematic payoff later on, unless there's some sort of commentary on the fact that this teacher seems to be a predator. It doesn't need to be in this book. What is it adding? I don't know. One more thing I wanted to mention for this mid-book update is about the writing style itself, because that is something that I absolutely despised about Beautiful World, Where Are You? The metaphor I used at the time, which I still feel is the most appropriate way to describe the feeling, is that it's like reading a book written by Siri. And I'm really glad to say that this book is not doing that. So that is a point in favor of the writing style here. I'm still not really a fan of the writing style. It's pretty blunt and matter-of-fact and boring to me. But at least it's not overly descriptive and robotic. It's just kind of there. Those are my thoughts for the first half of Normal People. I'm probably gonna finish this in the next hour or two because it's so short. And then I'll come back and let you know my thoughts at the end of this. Yoda was hanging out while I was filming. So much floof coming off you. Okay, off to finish this book. Let's go. Later, and I'm done. I finished Normal People. Where do I start? The second half of this book I enjoyed more than the first half, I would say. Well, enjoyed is maybe the wrong word. I found it more interesting. And that reminds me a lot of how I felt reading Beautiful World, Where Are You? Where, for me, the only positive in that entire reading experience were those little glimpses of interesting ideas where I thought I would read an essay about that, or listen to a podcast about that, or watch a video essay about that. But they were just sort of sprinkled throughout in that book, in the emails between characters, where it was just sort of like, here's a paragraph about this idea, here's a paragraph about this idea, without them actually being tied into the plot in any significant way or really at all. In this book, at least, those ideas felt slightly more connected to the characters and the story, although sometimes it really did feel like Sally Rooney just had an idea and decided she wanted it in the book, so she wrote in a scenario for one of the characters just so that she could express this thought. It's not my favorite writing style, to be honest. I much prefer an author, spend time with an idea and write a book specifically because they want to explore a particular idea and really get into the nitty-gritty. So as much as I did find some of those ideas interesting, things about like power dynamics between genders, control in relationships, and dominance and submission. There's a section where Marianne is thinking there's always been something inside her that men have wanted to dominate, and their desire for domination can look so much like attraction, even love. And then skipping forward a bit, whether she was respected or despised, it didn't make much difference in the end. Would every stage of her life continue to reveal itself as the same thing again and again, the same remorseless contest for dominance? That's interesting to me. I wouldn't say that Sally Rooney is exploring those ideas, really. She's exploring a character, Marianne, who is in several unhealthy and I would say abusive relationships. Although they're framed as BDSM, submission, domination type relationships, it's not really explored. It's just sort of thrown into the ether. And I guess maybe that's just Sally Rooney's style, that she just, you know, sort of stream of consciousness views out ideas here and there, and some of the ideas are interesting and some of them aren't. And that's just how she writes her books. It doesn't work for me, I guess is what I'm saying. I did find the characters more interesting in the second half as they get a couple years on, and Connell ends up dealing with some depression, anxiety. He has some suicidal ideation. I did find it interesting to read about how that affected him, how his personality seemed to shift, or how his self-confidence shifted from his time in high school into college, and just how his mental health deteriorated. I felt it was pretty realistic and interesting. I still didn't like Connell as a character, although I will say by the end he did grow on me a little bit. He did become a better person, I think, in some ways. Marianne is a hard one. I don't really like Marianne either, but it's less about Marianne as a person, although I will say her intellectual superiority and her privilege and her ignorance to her own privilege were pretty grating. I think a lot of what I didn't like about Marianne was the way that Sally Rooney framed her. It almost feels like we're supposed to find it romantic that Marianne is in these really dysfunctional relationships, that she asking partners to impose upon her the same pain that she's had to suffer from her family her whole life, and that not being acknowledged as a really unhealthy, unsafe dynamic for her. Even to the end where, you know, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but she's with a partner who refuses to physically harm her, but there still seems to be a level of submissive, dominant dynamics that she doesn't seem to be thinking about in a healthy way, and yet it seems to be treated like a positive thing, I guess. I also know that I might be reading into this because I'm particularly sensitive to portrayals of eating disorders, having suffered from one, but I didn't love how her eating disorder was portrayed. It felt very much like romanticizing an eating disorder, and that was pretty uncomfortable to read. You know, it was sort of treated like, oh, she's this incredibly thin, frail, you know, broken woman, but she's beautiful that way. Just remind me of dark places of the internet. And maybe it wasn't meant that way, but it really read like her eating disorder and her trauma and the unhealthy ways that she was recreating her trauma sexually were being romanticized. And that didn't sit well with me. So, you know, those are the things that I didn't love about Marianne. And it wasn't about the character in general. It was about the way that the author was writing her, about how she was being framed within the story. So where does that leave me? I'm sitting, I think, around a 2-star rating for this out of 5. There were things that I liked about it. There were little moments. There were a couple passages, a couple quotes that I appreciated. There were some ideas that I liked. I did feel like the characters developed more as we went further into the story, and I did find them at least slightly interesting to read about, Marianne more so than Connell, but that wasn't enough to make up for the lack of plot or purpose. Like, I'm not really sure why this book exists. I also continued to not enjoy the writing style, not just the lack of quotation marks, but just the very dispassionate, matter-of-fact stating things as they happen. It just felt very blah. The only character I liked, still Lorraine. I don't feel nearly as much deep, burning hatred towards this book as I did Beautiful World, Where Are You? But I wouldn't say I liked it or enjoyed it. I think now, having read 2 books of hers, I've just determined that her writing style isn't for me. The types of stories she wants to tell are not the types of stories that I'm particularly interested in reading. So as I did with Colleen Hoover, I am picking Sally Rooney out of my maybe I should give them one more chance pile and placing her firmly in the no thanks, I'm good pile. 2 out of 4. We're halfway through, and so far none of the authors have redeemed themselves. Although I will say, I didn't hate this, so that is a step up. What is it? What is it? Yes? Yes? Uh-huh. That's a nice story. Thanks for sharing. Thank you for putting your tail in my face. I appreciate that. So I'm moving on to the only male author in this video, Andy Weir. I'm picking up The Martian. I am a little scared because this was another one, Project Hail Mary, that everyone adored and I found incredibly irritating on every possible level. But I'm going to stay positive. It's going to be great. I'm going to love it. I'm going to love it. If I say it enough times, it will be true. So, oh. Yes? Yes? Do you want to come up here? Yoda would prefer if I didn't read. She'd prefer if I just hung out with her and gave her scritches. But I am going to read. I'll probably read with her lying on my chest so that I can't get up even if I really have to pee. So yes, I'm going to start this. Wish me luck, and I'll be back soon. What's up? I'm going to turn around. Do you want me to lie down a bit? Hi. Yeah, hi, honey. I might be trapped here. I might not actually be able to go anywhere else to read because it seems like Yoda is settling in for the evening. She's making biscuits, rubbing her head all over me. Oh, here she goes. Happy? Since I'm still recording because I can't leave because a cat has decided to use me as a bed, I will say I'm on page 3 and I'm already a little annoyed by the writing style. One of my big issues with Project Hail Mary was that it felt like I was being condescended to by the book. It felt very patronizing and kind of like a children's book. And so far this also has a bit of that vibe, which is not my favorite. Hopefully that's just at the very beginning and it needs to sort of establish some of the basic facts and then we'll get into a better flow. We'll see. Hey, there's swearing in this one. That's an upgrade. I really disliked that in Project Hail Mary, the author wanted the main character to swear but didn't want them to swear, so, saying, oh, gosh, darn, shucks, sorts of things instead of, just swearing, even though he was alone and in a terrible, scary situation. At least that won't be one of my pet peeves. How you doing, sweet pea? Yeah, I'm gonna get up, okay? Okay, I am a little bit more than halfway done The Martian, and it's been a roller coaster so far. I feel like my feelings about this book have swung wildly from one pole to the other in the first 50 to 100 pages, and I was getting more and more worried that this was going to be a repeat of Project Hail Mary. I was not having a good time. To give you a bit of an idea, the first tab I made was for world building, which I ended up replacing with something else because there's literally zero world building, even though we're on Mars, so. The second tab I added was for science and math dumping. I don't mind hard sci-fi. I don't mind getting into the nitty-gritty of the science or the math or whatever, but you have to tell it in an interesting way. I'm not a fan of Andy Weir's style of just sort of having a character inner monologue their way through a math problem or explain something in their own head as if they're teaching it to someone with a 10th grade understanding of science. It's just not enjoyable, and I'm into science. I was this close to going to university for biochem through my entire life. Science, and then later on when they split into different disciplines, biology and chemistry, were neck and neck my favorite subjects along with English. So I'm not anti-science. I'm very into the science. For example, I just finished reading a whole book specifically about fungi and mycelial networks and the ways that they have symbiotic relationships with other beings and had a huge impact on the development of our planet as we know it. This gets pretty in detail into the science. It gets into the nitty-gritty. I still was more entertained reading the science through this book and also generally enjoyed the writing style a lot more and found it more engaging and beautiful. So yeah, first little bit, I was not having a great time and I was really getting worried that this was going to be 3 for 3 misses for this video. So on page 7, I highlighted, I saw something that made me very happy and then something that made me very sad. The hab was intact, yay, and the mav was gone, boo. This is an adult book, correct? It's at least 50 pages before we get any other character, any other setting than Mark Watney on Mars, which, you know, is fine. I wouldn't even mind if there was a whole book with a single character stuck somewhere. That's fine with me, but not if it's Mark Watney. That I cannot handle. Once we started getting other characters, things started getting better. Page 12. The solar cell array was covered in sand, rendering it useless. And then in brackets, hint, solar cells need sunlight to make electricity. Mind blown. You're telling me solar cells need sunlight. Holy shit, that is like next level science. And what I wrote underneath that was, is this going to turn into mansplaining the novel? Because please no. Mark Watney is a botanist who doesn't like botanists. He's a not like other botanists botanist. He's a pick-me botanist, as one of my friends on Goodreads commented when I made this update. On page 16, he says, I got my undergrad degree at the University of Chicago. Half the people who studied botany were hippies who thought they could return to some natural world system, somehow feeding 7 billion people through pure gathering, which I immediately flagged because it's literally 100% possible to feed the entire population of the Earth even now with more people on just agriculture, just plants. We are literally already able to do this, and he's acting like it's some like off-the-wall ridiculous idea. And then he goes on to say, they spent most of their time working out better ways to grow pot. I didn't like them. I've always been in it for the science, not for any New World Order bullshit. Like, the judgment is dripping off the pages, and I think it's the funniest thing ever that I assume Weir, who is an engineer, I think, by trade, has clearly so much, a software engineer, yes, has so much disdain for botany or the people he perceives to be the prototype of a botanist, but then he still chose to make his protagonist a botanist. It's actually ridiculous and kind of hilarious, but also, again, I'm offended on behalf of botanists everywhere because I think botany is really fucking cool. Yeah, just lots of moments where I was noticing, you know, the charm of Mark Watney, like making a note that his asshole is doing as much to keep him alive as his brain after talking about the way he's reusing his waste to improve soil quality so he can grow his own food. It really feels like 12 to 14-year-old boy humor at the start, very juvenile, and that was how all of Project Hail Mary felt to me, so I was starting to get really worried as I kept reading that it was just going to be Project Hail Mary all over again. But like I said, once we started getting to the sections where other people were involved, not just Mark Watney, we spent some time at NASA where people on Earth were trying to figure out what was going on with him. We started seeing a little bit more of the rest of his team who were heading back towards Earth on Hermes. I enjoyed all of those chapters so much more than the Mark Watney sections before them that they felt like a huge relief. The best chapter in the whole book so far was the chapter that looked back on what actually happened when Mark Watney was left behind on Mars and the rest of his team went up to Hermes and left him for dead, focusing more on his 5 fellow astronauts. Literally the best chapter of the book. It was written much better. The writing style was significantly better. It was much more fluid and intense. There was a lot of tension and stakes. It was emotional. It was fantastic. And I feel like that chapter, chapter 12, was really the turning point for me. So page 155. And then for the next 100 pages to where I am now at page 254, I'm still really enjoying all the bits on Earth and on Hermes, but I'm also actually kind of enjoying the parts with Mark Watney somehow. And I was just saying to my husband a couple hours ago, I don't know if Mark Watney's getting less annoying or if I'm just developing Stockholm Syndrome, but whatever the case may be, I'm having more fun And I've chuckled a couple times, actually, so that's good. So I'm gonna go off and finish this book. I feel like I'm gonna go through it pretty quickly. I've been reading, again, for the past 100 pages or so, I've been reading way faster. It's just been a lot more engaging. So I think I'm gonna finish this probably pretty quickly, and then I will be back to give you my final review. I'm back. It's really late. I am really happy, honestly, to be able to say that I liked this book in the end. It's definitely not a perfect book for me anyway. I had my pet peeves and, you know, some of them continued all the way through to the end, but I was really pleasantly surprised to see that a lot of the things that annoyed me the most at the beginning and the things that drove me up the wall the whole time I was reading Project Hail Mary, they really dissipated as the book went on, and yeah, I ended up really enjoying it. So if I were to rate this right now, even though it's almost 2 a.m. and my brain is mush, I would probably give it 3 stars, like 3.4, you know, getting closer to the place where it could be rounded up to 4 stars, but not quite making it. So rounding it down to 3, that's where I'm at. I think parts of this were really great, and there are parts of it that I liked enough that I would have pushed it to a 4-star read for me, but I just think there are so many things that aren't for me in terms of the writing style and some of the characterization and just, you know, the choices around how Weir handles communicating the science to the reader. All of those things continued to bother me all the way through. I think I just started to get more used to them and I started letting go a little bit. But I also think that it just got better as the book went on. I think because the plot started picking up, we started having multiple different, you know, casts of characters in different places that we were keeping on top of, and things were getting more complicated and the tension was rising, stakes were rising, there was more going on. There was just less time for some of the meandering quality that was irking me a lot early on, and just less time for it to be log after log after log after log after log of Mark Watney talking to himself and making stupid jokes and spending way too much time detailing all of the science and math that he was doing. There were also a couple things here and there. Honestly, it wasn't nearly as bad as Project Hail Mary, which is kind of strange because I would have thought over time that Andy Weir would have learned more about the world and potentially had fewer prejudices, I suppose. But the characters in Project Hail Mary were way more stereotyped, way more wooden and one-dimensional than the characters in The Martian. Every character in The Martian is way more developed, not solely reliant on stereotypes. There were a couple thrown around. For the most part, they were sort of tongue-in-cheek, friendly ribbing between crewmates sort of thing, instead of what was included in Project Hail Mary, which to me was just very uncomfortable. That was great to see. I really felt like even some of the characters who were barely in the book, like Mindy, for example, she's not a huge character in the book. She does come back repeatedly, but I thought she was fantastic. And even though she had very limited page time, her personality really jumped out and you could see growth over time. I found her quite funny and I enjoyed her contributions, and she had a rich emotional life, even though we didn't have a huge number of opportunities to see it. I also found the rest of the crew of the Ares 3 mission really interesting, especially the commander. Some of the female characters in Project Hail Mary had me worried that Weir would not handle female characters very well, and I've also heard some not great things about Artemis, which is his only book with a female protagonist, but I felt like the female characters in this book were handled much better. The commander was awesome. I did appreciate that the commander was a woman. That was nice. A second woman on the team, Johansson, we didn't get quite as much from personality-wise. The commander, Lewis, I thought she was a really fantastically drawn character. Again, we got even less of her than we got of Mindy, but you still get a really great idea of who that character is. So it was nice to see. And I think, you know, it's kind of sad, I guess, because I look back on Project Hail Mary, and one of the things that made me so irate reading that book is that I could see how much potential it had, and there were so many things about it that I wanted to get excited about, and I just couldn't because it was so, in my opinion, poorly done in so many ways. And it was so frustrating because I was ridiculously excited to read it. I was really excited about the premise, and there were so many aspects of that story that could have been so cool. And reading The Martian, I can see that Weir has the ability to do a lot of the things that he failed at in Project Hail Mary, which makes me wonder why his writing is regressing. I would be interested in doing some research into how long he spent writing his books. It's interesting. To be honest, if I wasn't reading this as part of a challenge of, you know, purposely trying to give Andy Weir a second chance and also filming it for a video, I would have DNF'd within the first 100 pages. It was painful. It was only because I was making this video that I pushed through and got to the rest of the book, which I enjoyed a lot more. There's no reason why the first 100 pages have to be that painful, especially because Mark Watney became much more tolerable later on. Clearly Weir had it in him all along, and so did Watney, to not be a 12-year-old boy at all times. Mark Watney definitely became a more three-dimensional character as the book went on. I would have loved to see more of his internal life. He's alone on Mars for a long period of time, and I feel like there was a lot going on psychologically there, and we only got little snippets, and it would have been a really interesting character study to take a deeper look into what that would do to someone psychologically. I also feel like this book is sorely lacking in description. 90% of this book takes place on the surface of Mars, and it feels like it could be literally anywhere. Like he could just be trapped in the middle of a desert somewhere on Earth. There's so little in the way of description of the environment, of what he's seen, of what it feels like. Even awe at being on Mars, I feel like that was lacking too. I almost forgot he was on Mars several times. There were a couple moments where we got a little bit more description of, you know, the rocky, sandy terrain and a big desert and the red color being like a wasteland or whatever, but there could have been more, and it doesn't have to necessarily be some sort of purple prose, really poetic way to describe what it's like, although I would probably prefer that because that's just my cup of tea. I love really intricate, evocative, vividly descriptive writing when it comes to setting the scene, especially if we're on an alien planet. I would look to someone like Becky Chambers, her novella. This is one of my favorites. The descriptions of the alien planets in this novella are top-notch, top tier. You feel like you are there. It is so immersive. And that's one of the things I love most about sci-fi. You're on a different planet, or you're in space. Let me feel that sense of place. Let me feel like I am on Mars with you. And this book didn't do that almost at all. If I added up all the descriptions together, I feel like it would be less than a page, which is wild to me. There's so much extra potential in there, and I think Weir did a better job of delivering on the premise in this book by a long shot, but there was still a lot of potential here that was just left on the shelf. And that's kind of sad. I'm really tired. It is now after 2 a.m, and I feel like I'm rambling incoherently, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Does this mean that I'm going to read from Andy Weir in the future? Yes and no. Maybe. If he never publishes another book again, no, because I have no interest in reading Artemis. But if he continues to publish books, which I imagine he probably will, then I will consider it on a book-by-book basis. I'm open to reading more Andy Weir now, and this definitely improved my view of Andy Weir as an author, although I still have points of contention. But overall, a good experience. 3 stars for The Martian. 3 books down, 1 to go. I am now going to be reading the final book for this video, which is Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh. I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy this. Again, I'm going off of very little. I just have a gut feeling that this is going to be my kind of thing, unless all the things that drove me absolutely up the wall about my year rest and relaxation appear again in this book. I'm not going to start this tonight because, like I said, it's after 2 a.m. I am so tired. I'm going to start this tomorrow. Wish me luck, and I'm gonna go pass out now. Good night. Okay, so I am back for a little mid-book update for Death in Her Hands, and Yoda is helping. This is probably going to be the shortest update of this whole video because I don't have a lot to say. Nothing's really happened so far. So basically, we have our protagonist who is an older woman, and she takes her dog for a walk through a forest and she finds a note. And then the rest of the book from that point is literally just this woman making up scenarios that could fit the note, making up who the person referred to in the note is, you know, her age, her appearance, her entire life, basically, her tragic backstory. She also makes up a name and story for the person who wrote the note. She also came up with several other characters that could fit into this whole storyline to go with the note, and that is interspersed with some of her other thoughts about the people around her and also about her life with her husband before he passed away. And that's what the book has been so far. So I'm not really sure what to think. I'm not hating it by any means, but I'm also not completely engrossed. I'm not really sure what direction this is going to be going in. I see some inklings of interesting twists and turns that could happen. I have some theories, so we'll see if any of those play out and how I feel about it as it wraps up. But right now, halfway through the book, I don't have very many feelings one way or the other. I will say Ottessa Moshfegh is continuing the trend of writing unlikable main characters. Vesta, our protagonist in this book, is, you know, still not the best. She is very fat phobic, very. So that's something I would caution anyone who's considering reading this. There's a lot of fat phobia. But yeah, it's kind of a weird book so far, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I enjoy weird books, so this could go in a direction that really works for me. But it's definitely interesting reading this, not having any foreknowledge of the plot, because I wasn't expecting it to be 130 pages of a woman making up stories in her head about a like 3-sentence note she found in the woods. So that's this book. I'm gonna go finish it, probably will be pretty quick, and then I'll be back to give you my final thoughts on Death in Her Hands and wrap up this entire video. See you soon. I'm here to share my final thoughts on the last book of this video, Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh, and honestly, I'm not sure that I'm able to coherently summarize my thoughts and feelings about this book, because nothing about this book is coherent, not in a bad way necessarily. It's complicated. So this is a very weird book, which, if you know my reading taste, is not a bad thing. It's often a very good thing. Like I said at my halfway point update, nothing happens in this book. Well, that's not quite true. Things do happen, but very little. This is not about the plot at all. This is very much a deep character study of this 72-year-old woman, Vesta, her state of mind as it deteriorates, and the ways that she is in conversation with herself, essentially. It was very interesting. I appreciated how it built in pace and tension and paranoia and the frantic quality of the narration. I felt myself reading faster and faster and faster, which felt like it matched Vesta's internal monologue, which was getting more and more chaotic and frenzied. And it was just a very interesting experience. I wouldn't say that most of it was all that enjoyable, but it was certainly very interesting. And as somebody who loves character-driven stories, I love to get a really deep look at a character, what's going on inside their mind and how they're coping with the situations they're in, perspective on the world. This was a very interesting example of that. And it's really hard to talk about this without giving things away that are better left unsaid if you're going to read it yourself. This was a way better experience for me than my year of rest and relaxation in pretty much every single way. Our protagonist is still definitely very unlikable in a lot of ways. She has a lot of opinions about things that I do not agree with. The fat phobia was the most blatant that came back over and over and over again, but there was a lot. internalized misogyny, judgment of people with facial scarring, slut shaming. I'm sure there was more that's just not at the top of my head right now, but she's not necessarily an awesome human, but she's definitely very interesting, and being in her mind is fascinating. So I don't know how to rate this either, to be honest. I think I'm probably falling around 4 stars for this. I'm not sure I could quite give it 5. I think there's a couple things that I was sort of hoping for that didn't quite come to pass that would have been the cherry on top, I feel like. But a lot of the ways that it sort of wrapped up in the end, a lot of the revelations, if you can even call them that, were along the lines of what I was starting to suspect, and I found that quite interesting and satisfying. So I think 4 stars is a good rating for my experience of this. A very unique book. I definitely think this is not going to be for everyone. I think a lot of people would probably really hate this book. But if you generally enjoy strange books, character studies, books that are maybe more plotless and more of a thought experiment, this might be up your alley. I'm glad that I read it. I'm kind of scared to read more from Ottessa Moshfegh because I've had now 2 completely polarizing experiences with her work, and I've heard very mixed things about some of her other books, so I might wait a while to try more from her, but I'm definitely keeping the door open now to reading more of her work, and I think eventually curiosity will get the best of me because she definitely has interesting ideas. And while my year of rest and relaxation really didn't work for me in literally every single way, Death in Her Hands, surprisingly, was very up my alley. So 4 stars for Death in Her Hands, which means we can now check if my predictions for my rankings of these books was correct at the start of this video. So I have all my finished books here, and I already put them in order of how well I liked them. So adding this one to the pile, once again having the issue with the Martian being a different size. It's funny to me that this is literally the order I read them in, but this is my ranking: 4 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars, and 1 star. That is very satisfying to me. I couldn't have planned it any better if I could have planned ahead of time how I would feel about books I hadn't even read yet. This is my ranking, and unless I'm mistaken, this is the ranking that I predicted at the beginning. I'm pretty sure initially I had the Martian on top, and then I ended up swapping them on a gut instinct. That is uncanny. I mean, I knew that I had a pretty good gut instinct about what books I was going to like and how I was going to feel about them before I read them, but this is next level, especially considering I hadn't even read basic summaries of the plots of any of these books ahead of time. I was basically going off of my previous experience with the authors and the title and cover of these books. So I'm honestly a bit impressed with myself, I'm not gonna lie. I'm excited to see what your predictions were in the comments once this video is up, and see if y'all were also right with your predictions. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of the books mentioned in this video, these 4 or the original 4 that I read from these authors, if you've read any of them. I'd also love to know if you've ever tried this, read a book from an author that you really hated and given them one more go, and how that turned out for you. I'm definitely glad I made this video. I was really worried after the first 2 that this was going to be the kind of video where I just hate everything and it was going to be a bit of a downer, but I'm really glad that it turned out that I liked 2 and didn't like 2, and that they went in order from least favorite to most favorite, so I could end on a positive note. Fantastic. Once again, couldn't have been better if I planned it, and it was impossible to plan. I'm feeling chuffed, but at this point I have a bit of an inkling of how long this video is going to be because I've been editing as I've been finishing the filming process, and it's a long one, so I'm not going to drag it out. I'm just going to finish this video because this doesn't need to be a feature-length film. So thank you for being with me through this entire video. If you made it all the way to the end, you are amazing, and I appreciate you so much. Please leave emojis in the comments that remind you of these 4 books so I know you're a real one and made it all the way to the end. Thank you again to GlassesUSA.com for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to click the link in the description box to get the amazing exclusive deal just for my subscribers from GlassesUSA.com. It's only available for 24 hours, so don't wait. Click that link in the description box. Thank you as always to my patrons for your support. Y'all are fantastic and I appreciate you so much. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thanks for hanging out with me for this video. I had so much fun, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.